so other people can join in as they wish later. So no one will be shut out. But Carlos, would you like to say a few words about what it is that we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah. For me, science, physics is what I'm trained in. I try to use that in order to understand uh, God better. And so I try to think about what I've learned uh, from the physical world and what I know about how the world works, and try to mesh that in with what I've been taught about God and what I think I know about God. And so this phrase "God is light" has been on my mind for quite a while, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought that there has to be, at least for me, I didn't want to think of that phrase as just uh, some nice words or words that sound nice. I was trying to find some real meaning, and I used what I know about physics to do that. And I think, at least for me, I found something that's meaningful, and hopefully it'll be meaningful for all of you. Um, so um, that's pretty much a good intro um, of what I'm going to be talking about. So, shall we start?
Sure. Well, shall we lay some ground rules about questions? Do you want people to type them into the chat section?
Yeah, keep the questions. I think keep the questions till the end,
Okay.
because otherwise I'll lose where I am. And I apologize that this is not a multimedia presentation like the first class I taught, but now that I think about it, it could have been helpful, but let's see how this works, and we'll go from there.
Very good.
All right. So the title of this talk is called "God is Light: Metaphorical Truth or Physical Reality." Um, so when I was a kid, when I would go to church on Sundays, I remember walking past the church walls, and I would be drawn into a daydream of being a priest, of being close to God. And I remember my mom telling me that God hears children's prayers before anyone else's. And I did want to be a priest as a kid, among other things. One of the things I remember is my mom had this huge Bible at home, and I would look at the pictures, pictures of God and of Jesus and of heaven and of the angels. And I was fascinated with pictures of hell and all those sufferers reaching out to God. I like the ones with the bolts of lightning shooting across the sky. I like the ones with the rays of light streaming down from the clouds, signifying that God is here and he's watching and doing, God stuff. Light coming down from the sky to the clouds. And I started to think, why did light signify God? That was then, and of course, during my college years, we'll never be as smart as we were then, right? I pretty much abandoned God and studied what mattered to me at the time, physics and music. And physics taught me about light, but only the physical aspects of light, wave mechanics, optics, quantum physics, but nothing about light as a symbol for God, nothing about God as light, nothing about those pictures of rays of light breaking through those majestic clouds in our family Bible. So let's get started with the meat of this presentation. Now, here's a warning for all of you. This is all stuff that I think about. All conclusions and assumptions are mine, and any errors or misunderstandings are not mine. No, actually, they're all mine. Okay, we all know about physical light. I mean, that's all around us, everywhere, all the time. We see it with our eyes, we feel it on our bodies. We use light every day to look for things, to know when to stop or go on the streets, to check ourselves before going out for the day, to entertain ourselves by watching TV, etc., etc. When I was a kid, I was fascinated by light, especially by laser light. I even went so far as to try to buy an industrial laser. To do what with it was a question that did not enter my mind. And oh, my poor mother. No, I did not get one. We all know about spiritual light. The Bible is full of references to light as a good thing. The Bible is also full of references to darkness, the absence of light. John tells us that God is light, that Jesus is the light of the world, and that we should be children of light. So, is there substance to those statements, or are they just nice words worthy of greeting card verses? So throughout this talk, remember the words, God is light. They come up again and again. And think about what those words mean to you right now. And then think about what those words mean throughout this talk. Physical and spiritual light, are they the same thing? Is one real, like I said before, is one real and the other just symbolic that really doesn't mean anything? Are they both of importance in knowing God? I think so. There are attributes of both that I think blur the distinction because they reinforce each other. So, if God is light, then we may be asking light to do a lot more than just using it to see the world around us. Have you ever wondered why God is equated with light? I mean, why light and not hydrogen or radioactivity or clouds or gravity or something else? Why is God not kind of like light or sort of like light? Is there something special about light that makes it worthy of being equated with God? What can we know about God from knowing about the physical light, other than just surrendering and saying, well, you know, God is infinite and we'll never know the infinite. So that's the starting point, square zero. God is infinite and we just give up because we can't understand the infinite. So let's talk about light from the perspective of the natural world, the physical world. Light is radiation. That's it. It's electromagnetic radiation. Radiation could be matter, atomic particles that are unstable and break up into other particles, like little tiny bullets. Remember Chernobyl in Russia in the 1980s? They talked about those billions of neutrons being like tiny, tiny bullets, and that's what killed you. Anyway, radiation is not necessarily a harmful and scary thing. When I was a physics student at university, I was doing an experiment where I needed to use the department's linear accelerator. That's a machine that accelerates atomic particles to near the speed of light. So there were other students using the same equipment, and while I was setting up my experiment in the target room, the accelerator beam was fired accidentally. There were horns blaring and red lights flashing all over the place. I didn't know what the heck was going on. It turns out I was bombarded with beta radiation. Yep, I was. Yet, here I am, still kicking and screaming and talking. Fortunately for me, beta radiation is a kind of radiation that can be stopped with a single sheet of paper. You right now, yeah, you, where's the camera? You right now are being bombarded with radiation from the sun, from the earth, from each other, from the room you're in, from the food you eat, from cosmic rays coming from other stars, and from the light bulbs that happen to be in the room you're in. So radiation is energy emitted through some mechanism, and we can't talk about light or radiation without talking about atoms. But don't worry, it's painless. For our purposes, think of an atom as a building with elevators, and the ground is the nucleus of the atom. And the electrons are the elevators that can stop at any floor. And of course, their natural state is to be at the first floor. So these elevators that are going up and down are being pushed and shoved and shaken by all sorts of stuff, street traffic, and the building is creaky, and people are running by, and there's other elevators moving up and down. There are construction crews out in the street. All this stuff is like radiation that's shaking these elevators. So radiation is created in many ways, but for this talk, it is created when an electron around the nucleus of the atom falls to a lower floor, like the elevator moving to a lower floor. The energy released when this happens is light. So far, light is the only thing we can use that allows us to learn about the world around us. So everything we know about the universe is due to the fact that light exists. So electromagnetic radiation includes all kinds of light, infrared, microwaves, X-rays, et cetera, Visible light, which is only a tiny, tiny portion of the entire realm of electromagnetic radiation, is the light that we can see from red to violet. I think we all know that Newton is given credit for discovering that natural light is composed of many colors, and that he used a glass crystal to create rainbow from sunlight. And so we found out that light is more complicated than you thought. Now, did you know that when you see a rainbow, you actually, multiple rainbows are actually created, and that red is at the top of each rainbow and blue at the bottom? Check that out next time you see one. So light from light bulbs gives us warmth and comfort. Light from flashlights allows us to look for things in the dark. Laser light can transmit information. It can be used for surgery. It could be used to cut steel. X-rays can penetrate our bodies. We listen to the news via radio waves. We use radio waves in the form of radar to protect our ships. Microwaves can cook our foods and allow us also to talk to spacecraft that are millions of billion or billions of miles out in space. We watch TV by means of light blinking on and off really fast to make pictures. So life without light would be pretty darn difficult. Light has momentum. Light can alter matter at the atomic level. From our perspective, from our frame of reference, light moves really super fast, 186,000 miles per second. That's about 7 trips around the Earth in 1 second. Unlike you or me, light has no mass, zero. Doesn't weigh anything, which is why it can move at the speed of light. It can never move faster or slower. It's cursed, if you will, to move at that particular speed. From an astronomical perspective, though, light is incomprehensibly slow. When I was working on the Voyager mission to the outer planets, it would take our radio signals 8 hours to get to the spacecraft and 8 hours to get the responses back. Signals to Mars take minutes to get there. So you can imagine conversations becoming really difficult. Hey, I'm calling you at Mars, how you doing? So you have to wait, you go get a cup of coffee, you read your email, and the response is, what do you want? But then you forgot what you asked. Astronomers look at starlight for decades to find out if and how a particular star has moved or changed. Decades. Astronomy is really for the patients. Every time you look at the stars in the night sky, you're looking into the past. Light has to travel from the stars into your eye, sometimes billions of years. That's how far away things are in the sky, and that's how slow light travels throughout the universe. Early in the 20th century, when scientists were convinced that there was no new physics to learn, and they actually thought that. Isn't that pretty arrogant? They thought that there was nothing new to learn. They found out that light was really bizarre. They were about to discover that there's much more to light than we thought. You can stop light. You can twist it. You can squeeze it. You can create electricity from it. And this is weird. Light can know about itself. So light exists throughout the universe from the cosmological down to the atomic level. It is everywhere, even in seeming darkness. Let's talk about light from a spiritual perspective and see how we can weave what we know about God, well, what I know about God. And I mean not as a metaphorical or literary symbol, but as something real, as real to the people who wrote about it as the sun that they saw every day. So light is thought of as good. Like light, God destroys the darkness. Darkness symbolizes bad things, corruption, sin, those things we do and think about in our secret places. God is everywhere at the same time, all the time. Like light, God can see into ourselves, meaning God knows everything. Light looks like there is no concept of time for God, just like light. There is no past, no future, or better yet, the past and future all exist at the same time. Like light, God can be dangerous. And I mean by that he's not to be taken lightly, but to be taken seriously. God is a force. God can move things. God causes things to happen. Like light, God communicates through his word, through others, through dreams, etc. God can change us. God gives us comfort. Like light, God can break us. He broke me for sure. That's not a bad thing. God can heal. Like light, we may not see God directly, but we know God is there. Matthew tells us to let your shine light before others. John tells us God is in the light. Paul tells us that Jesus will shine on you. John tells us that the glory of God gives light. So, how does the physical worldview of light intersect with the spiritual view? If God is light and light is if God is light and light is radiation, then God is radiation. If God is light and light is composed of photons, then God is made of photons. This view, wait, what? Let's keep going. Indulge me. This view of God as light has enormous real consequences. Did you know that light changes you? When light shines on you, electrons in your body are moved to a higher energy level, just like those elevators we talked about. They must return to their initial energy level, and as they return, they lose energy. And voila, you have radiation. This is what happens when light bounces off of you. This is why we see each other. Really, the only reason we see anything, light from some source is bouncing off of others in the room that you're in, or bouncing off of the room into your eye. Your eye then sends electrical signals to your brain, and your brain attempts to organize these impulses into an image. Furthermore, light from the light bulbs that happen to be in the room you're in and bounces off of somebody else with you and strikes you, changes you at the atomic level and pushes on you differently from the light that bounces off of somebody else. You are physically changed by the mere fact that others are physically with you. And you are changed by each person in a different way. Now let that sink in for a bit. This is important. You are physically changed by the mere fact that others are there with you. And you are changed by each person in a different way. And remember, this is not spiritual stuff. This is physical. This happens. This is true. Light pushes on you. Light has pressure. So when light strikes you, it physically moves you. I know, not by much, but it's measurable. Light pressure has already been verified in space and can be used as a means of propulsion because light has energy and light has momentum. So you create light. Your body is warm, and therefore you create infrared radiation. And the light that is created by you is right now changing those around you, and vice versa. Again, think about that. The light that is created by you is right now changing those around you, and vice versa. We don't see it and we don't sense it, but nonetheless it is there, like God, right? Light can carry information. We use this mechanism to talk to spacecraft, to make the internet work for you, to make your computer work. Light has no past, no future, only the now. If you were a beam of light, you would travel no distance throughout the universe. You would arrive at your destination the moment you left. It would take you 0 time to go from here to New York City or to the edge of the universe. You would have no concept of time, no yesterday, no tomorrow, no a while ago, no in a few minutes. And it's not that it takes 0 time. It's that time has no meaning for light, for God. Why? Because God is light. So take the room you're in. For light, that room has 0 size. Light is touching all of us now everywhere at the same time. The room you are in is an infinitesimal dot to light. Imagine the earth, or better yet, the universe. For light, the universe has 0 size. Light is touching everything, everywhere, at the same time, all the time. Light from the beginning of the universe, light from the edge of the universe, light from the center of the Milky Way. Now, substitute the word light for God. The universe is instantly traversable to light and therefore to God. And again, it's not that the size is 0. It's that size doesn't mean anything in the realm of light, of God. Why? Because God is light. God doesn't have to traverse any distance to go from hugging you to hugging somebody in India or somebody in the Andromeda galaxy. The universe is instantly available to God, all of it now. Why? Because God is light. We know about the universe because light exists. Therefore, we know about the universe because God exists. God allows us to know the world around us. He gave us himself for that purpose. Remember, God is light. So what does all this mean? Well, for me, this is some of the things that I think about. Light is the only physical thing that satisfies God's job description, all right? Of being everywhere at the same time, of knowing everything all the time, of knowing us completely, of being beyond description and yet able to know us intimately, of providing comfort and healing, of being dangerous and loving, of being in fellowship with us all the time, everywhere, of communicating with us and vice versa, of knowing our past, our present, and our future all the time. You know, in our reality, in our physical reality, We can walk away from God. We can abandon God. We can deny God. But the funny thing is, it turns out we only think we can walk away. We only think we can abandon, or we only or deny his presence. It makes as much sense to deny light than to deny God. We may sometimes fear that God has forsaken us. Oh no, God has abandoned me and he has forgotten about me. Oh no, what am I going to do? In physical reality, listen to this, in physical reality, in God's reality, that's just not possible. God and all of us are eternally bound together. It is physically impossible to be apart from God, just as it is physically impossible to be apart from light. We abide in light, therefore we abide in God. We can't do otherwise. It is physically impossible. That's not the way the universe works. So why all of this? Because God is light. Do you get that? Let that sink in for a bit. It is physically impossible to be apart from God. We abide in light, therefore we abide in God. We can't do otherwise. It is physically impossible. So God calls us to him in our reality, not for his benefit, but for our own, because in physical and God's reality, we never left. We can never leave. We were never and can never be separated from God. And I think Paul knew that when he wrote in Romans 8, for I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. God is light. We now know everything there is to know about God from that phrase. Yay! Well, it turns out, no, not really. Boo! We don't know everything, not even close. Turns out that light comes up short. The universe comes up short. What? But we've done so much work, and I've talked for so long. This can't be. So what's missing? The personality trait of God is something that light doesn't have. Light is not a person. Light doesn't care. It doesn't love. It's not creative. It doesn't listen. It doesn't forgive. Light isn't good nor bad. It just is. Light is created. God is the creator. God redeems. Light doesn't. I think that God is light tells us something incredibly important about the nature of God. But don't confuse that with light is God, because it isn't. They're not the same thing. So, for example, I can say that I'm a human being, which is true, but I am more than a human being. I'm a father, a son, a brother, a husband, a sinner. I think the same is true about God. God is not exclusively equal to light. It turns out God is much, much, much more than light, more than we know. I suppose more than we'll ever know here in the human realm. And so we're back to square one, the beginning, acknowledging that God is infinite and we can't know the infinite. Do we just give up? No. We continue to ask and think and reason and wonder. And I'm okay with that, because for me, it's fun to try and think of this stuff that's making me crazy. So the phrase God is light tells us that God has the qualities of light, but much, much more than that. And hopefully that phrase carries a bit more meaning for you. They're just nice. They're not just nice words to say. There is real meaning behind them, physical and spiritual. They paint a picture of God who is in real communion with us, always with us, everywhere, and that we can't exist otherwise. The wonderful thing is that's how God created the universe. There is the reality of the everyday, and there's this underlying eternal reality that is nothing short of astounding, and they both intertwine with each other. So I hope you are closer to God now than when we started this talk, and remember light and really see it for what it is and for what it does. It is the one thing in our reality that unmistakably says God is here and he's here to stay.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you. Well, I think at this point, we can open it up to questions. Either you can hit your space bar to unmute yourselves and ask a question or make a comment, and or you can put it into the chat line if you like. One of the things that I would like to, maybe a little statement that I would like to get your feedback on, Carlos, is about the nature of, because light makes things visible, that truth becomes more visible. That without light, we cannot see reality. We cannot experience truth. And how does that work? What does that bring up for you as you're thinking along these lines?
Well, it gets to be very philosophical, I think, because you start to get into the discussion of what is it that we see. So when I see this glass of water, okay, or when I see my laptop, or when I see Susie, what am I seeing? I'm seeing light that is bouncing off of some source, maybe this lamp over here, and it's bouncing off of Susie, it's bouncing off of my laptop, it's bouncing off of this glass of water, and it's reaching my eye, and then the brain tries to arrange all these impulses and make an image. So what do we see? We are seeing light being reflected off of objects. Is that the same thing as is that the same thing as perceiving the real object? I have this.
Is it merely a representation of truth, or is it truth itself?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I have this concept of approximations. So for me, okay, seeing Susie, for example, is a first approximation of seeing the real Susie, because I'm seeing the light that is bouncing off of her. I'm not perceiving her. I don't even know what that means. It can get really philosophical. So I don't know. I probably have not answered your question. You're probably better able to answer that question about what the truth.
Well, I'm saying, maybe that's why I said an approximation of the truth. It's the closest we can get to get insight, to a truth. Because if we're in complete darkness, we have no feedback whatsoever. I mean, if we don't have radiation, bouncing into our eyeballs and allowing us to process, and we don't have the light that's actually going on inside our brain, because even when we close our eyes, we're seeing all kinds of light, in images in our minds, and I'm assuming that's some kind of a radioactive process.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, the reason why Susie looks different than a glass of water is because the atoms that compose her body are different than the atoms that compose this glass of water. And therefore, I can make a distinction between this glass of water and, this door over here. So, so that brings us closer to the truth. The truth is that a glass of water is not a door. But I think that's about as close to the truth that we can get.
Hmm.
Carlos, may I ask you a question? This is Frank. And I'm so unschooled in quantum physics other than in the sketchiest of ways. So in this universe with all these light waves circulating and percolating, are there in fact other parallel universes, parallel people or systems operating in conjunction with with what our reality seems to be?
Well, believe it or not, that's a serious uh, subject of discussion among physicists, the idea of multiple universes. And that idea grew out of an interpretation of quantum physics that says, well, every possible state that, for example, an electron can be in is a different universe. So in other words, and I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, every possible option whenever you're about to make a decision, every possible outcome gives rise to a new universe. And this is not, I mean, that sounds crazy and it sounds fantastical, but this is stuff that physicists are really thinking about, whether the universe is a simulation by our future ancestors to try to find out, where humanity came from and how the universe was created. I mean, there's some crazy ideas out there that are being seriously discussed, and a lot of these ideas have their basis in some pretty firm physical and mathematical ideas.
I'm thinking of the Bruce Willis movie that the title escapes me, but where the line is "I see ghosts," where there's a whole parallel universe going on. I guess that's what I'm sort of curious about your thoughts on.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a serious discussion with physicists. I mean, that's all I know about it now.
But you don't dismiss the possibility.
Who am I to say whether it's a possibility or not? But I'm sure you can find some theoretical physicist that can show you the mathematics behind that idea. I just am not one of them.
Thank you.
A little bit of what Frank was saying, what we think of as reality is what our brains tells us is there. And we cannot see all of the colors possible. Therefore, what's between me and this screen could be most anything that my brain can't interpret it as being there. Is that possible?
That's another thing that's a subject of serious consideration. The idea of how consciousness fits into the universe, and whether or not consciousness is the only thing that really exists. There's a famous experiment in physics called the double slit experiment, and it has to do with shooting electrons or photons into a couple of very thin slits, and how light, and then there's a screen behind the slits, and the experiment has to do with determining what kind of patterns are created when you shine light onto these double slits. And there's some very funny and strange things going on in that experiment. And people have, physicists have started to question whether or not, and this is serious, okay? I'm not making this stuff up. They're starting to question whether or not there's a consciousness in the universe behind this particular experiment, and therefore behind the universe. Now, of course, we don't have the mathematics to quantitatively describe consciousness, because we don't really know what consciousness is. So there's all these ideas that are being taken seriously that include consciousness, parallel universes, multiple universes, that are being discussed as serious topics in the physics world. And so who knows what, what they'll come up with in the next few years.
So if there is an ultimate reality it's possible we are not comprehending.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Carlos, you said at one point that light exists even in the most darkest, even in the most perceived, in the most of perceived darkness. How would you explain your thought process of God as light to a person who lives in perpetual darkness, like a blind person? How would you equate that to somebody who can't experience the visual aspect of light, but can only experience the other forms of radiation that are out there, like heat and vibration and sound? How would you equate your light theory to that?
Well, I mean, it's definitely difficult, but the existence of light is independent of whether one can see or not. I mean, I can shine a light on you, and you'll feel the warmth and you'll feel the heat. And so all I can say is that light is a physical reality. And if it wasn't a physical reality, we would just not exist.
So then light also has a cornerstone of a building block of life, period. Because without light, without any kind of radiation, we could not have any kind of photosynthesis, we could not have growth, we could have not had plants, we could not have had, even any kind of single cell beings. So, I mean, would that be a fair assumption? Since light is radiation, therefore, if there is zero radiation in the world, then there could be no actual life in the world.
If there's no radiation in the world, there would be no mass. There would be no matter.
There would be no matter, and therefore there would be no life, right?
There'd be nothing. Yeah, that's a good point. The amazing thing for me is the personal nature of how light works, and the fact that I'm physically changed by the mere fact that I'm with somebody. And if I'm with person A, I'm changed in a different way from person B. That to me is astounding.
Mm.
May I speak?
Of course.
This is Lorraine.
Hi, Lorraine.
Oh, sorry, I got to take my headset off so I can hear. Um, First of all, thank you very much. I've thoroughly been absorbed by this, very thought-provoking. Um, if are we to draw an analogy between God, light, the visible spectrum of light, or we're not? God and light are the same thing, not analogous, but actually. So then if there's light that's not perceived, the rest of the spectrum, God is there too, right?
Correct.
So then there are aspects of God that we have to acknowledge and accept.
That's a very good observation. I hadn't thought about it, but you're absolutely right. Light does not only include visible light. It includes the entire electromagnetic spectrum. And visible light is a tiny, tiny, tiny portion of that spectrum. Yeah, that's a really good observation. Thank you for that.
Well, yeah, and what I love about that observation also is it just adds to that sense of mystery and humility that we have to face God with. You know, I mean, one of the great sins of humanity has been for us to assume that we can, you know, either, well, I wouldn't say maximize our understanding, but minimize God, because we're often so reductionist in our descriptions of God. And to acknowledge those aspects that are completely unknowable because of the invisibility of the type of light that God can be, is actually, I think, something we should be holding near and dear to our hearts, and you know, to keep us humble, you know, walk humbly before our God.
Yeah, but isn't that amazing that the light that we don't see, let's say God, let me reduce God to the electromagnetic spectrum. The light that we don't see is unknowable, like you said, but the light is there. And just because we can't know it, because our eyes are limited, doesn't mean that it's not there. It's physically there. And we're only seeing a tiny portion of that spectrum. So what does that say about what we know about, you know, we only know about 4% of the universe. You know, as much as we think we know about the universe, about the sun, stars, and black holes, and physics, and chemistry, we only know about 4%. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? And
Yeah.
so there's a parallel from that to, you know, we only know about God. We only know a little tiny bit about God, because the rest of God is there. We just can't see it, but it doesn't mean it's not there.
When you say bit, it's even difficult to quantify bit in bit of what, or bit in what sense. An interesting point that you made and alluded to early on is what we know about the universe is only through light. Different radiations and, you know, infrared and UV and so on, but all we know is what we see through telescopes or we see through imagery. We've got a few moon rocks and that kind of thing, but basically all we know is what we know from light. And in some ways, what we know is terribly alienating. And by that I mean, I don't mean to contradict anything that Carlos said, but to get on the simple matter of scale is immensely, incomprehensibly fast as light goes. Carlos was pointing out some distances and some times, several minutes at this immense speed to talk to Mars, hours and hours to the outer planets. If something could go as fast as anything could possibly go, to get to the nearest star would take over 4 years. To get to the nearest other solar systems would take many, many, many years. And that's going as fast as anything could go. And as best we know, it's not possible to exceed the speed of light. And it's not a matter of building faster machines. It just physically can't be done. That gets questioned a lot, but every time it gets questioned, that theory holds through. The more information we get, the more that theory has been holding.
Right.
Which is pretty amazing. We have all these immense machines and computers and fantastic instruments, and yet everything that Einstein predicted with pencil and paper turns out to be true. That aside, looking out into space, with all the gazillions and gazillions of stars, people say, well, it's very, very likely there must be intelligent life out there someplace. And that could very well be true. But these distances are so immense. It could take, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions and millions of years to go from one point to another. That's why it's very hard to imagine us going anywhere meaningful. It's very, very hard to imagine any intelligent life coming here. As Carlos also alluded to, when you look out at the stars, it takes millions of centuries sometimes for the light to come to us. And to ponder that, if a star blew up, we might not know it for millions of years. When there is a supernova and we see it, it happened umpteen eons in the past.
Right.
So we're alone in a way that we could not possibly imagine. And whether that's comforting or alienating is something that is to the privacy of one's own thoughts.
Right.
I want to briefly come back to an experiment that Carlos mentioned also. He mentioned electrons going through two slits. What's the big deal about that? It's called the two-slit experiment. It's very, very important for a lot of reasons. One is that to boil it down to a nutshell, there's no way to predict what a particular electron is going to do. You could have all the information in the world. You could know where it's headed and how fast it's going and blah, 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 blah. You don't know what it's going to do. You can't predict it. And that's a consequence of quantum mechanics, is that some things are just not knowable, no matter what, no matter how good your instruments are and how good your calculations are. There's a limit to how much we know something. You can make statistical observations over a large number of outcomes. So when people dabble with the notion of God, and physicists do only in the sense that to cosmology, I guess I lost a thought here before. Looking out at the stars, we can tell that they're redshifted. So everything is moving away from us. That means that if you go back in time, everything must have been coming together. That's where the Big Bang, in a simplified way, that's where the notion of the Big Bang comes from. If everything is moving away from us right now, then backward in time, everything must have come from same source. And people have done lots of exploration, lots of investigations and so on, and that seems to be a very consistent picture. It seems to be consistent with others. So now, if there's this inherent unpredictability about all of this, then if this initial essence of whatever the universe was, however you want to label that, whether it's a question of consciousness or not, physicists say, well, even if there is some consciousness, that consciousness can't predict the future. Or can this consciousness break its own laws? So that's a conundrum among many others. And it seems like lots of physicists will say if there's some sort of prime mover, well, there's no way to know what a certain electron is going to do at a certain point. So once you get things moving, there's no way to know where it's going to go and how it's going to happen. And does that put limitations on our understanding of what's behind the whole universe?
Jim, isn't that the definition of faith?
Maybe.
Well,
Not having any answers, but feeling that there is something more, that all of these the fact that we're even asking these questions,
well,
to me, bespeaks that there is something more, and that, to me, that's faith.
here's a
Maybe,
question.
but, you know, as far as my own, I'll just give a quick answer and I'll back off it. My quick answer is, well, I don't know the future anyway. So.
I don't want to know it these days. I'm praying for a certain resolution that may not happen.
The question here is, if there is some consciousness behind the universe, maybe that consciousness is limited by an inability to know the future because it can't be known. Faith on my part, sure, because I don't know the future and I don't assume I do, and I don't depend on knowing it. But in the bigger cosmos, maybe that's just not knowable at all, and does that change? With that, I'll step back and hit my mute.
Well, here's a question for Father Neil. What does it say about the creator that created a universe that has limits to what we can know?
Well, I would go back to the story of the garden, and the great hubris, the original sin, so to speak, was Adam and Eve trying to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, to know all things good and evil, and therefore to make oneself equated with God. Therefore, you do not need God. So there is an inherent inequality in the relationship, that we are not supposed to know all, and we can't, nor could we dream to know all about God. God, on some levels, is always going to remain unknowable, inscrutable, and that we put ourselves in mortal danger when we reach too far. It's sort of like is it Pegasus who tries to fly to the sun, to the light, and then everything falls apart?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think that's the Greek myth, Pegasus. Anybody great in the Greek mythology can correct me?
Icarus.
It's Icarus. Yeah.
Icarus, that's it. Sorry, Pegasus, yeah. Icarus. One of those S's.
Yes.
Thank you.
May I say something? Carlos, your analogy of light to God has really given me a whole lot to think about. You said that time has no meaning for light, and that time has no meaning for God. And that, for me, has always been a really hard thing. How can God be at Carlos's house, taking care of Carlos one minute, and be at my house the next minute, taking care of me? And light is here, there. If I've taken notes, I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I just wanted you to know that I really think this wants a lot of thinking about, at least on my part, and I want to thank you for it.
There are real consequences to the postulates that Einstein declared as part of his relativity paper, and one of those consequences is that there are some things that are invariant, meaning that they're the same no matter who is measuring a particular invariant, and so that concept gives rise to something called proper time. And in the relativity world, proper time is an invariant. And when you dig into that invariant a little bit more, you find out that a ray of light, if it had a clock with it as it travels at the speed of light, would not tick. A ray of light doesn't know anything about time. So a ray of light that goes from point A to point B goes from point A to point B in 0 time. That means that the universe, as incomprehensibly big as it is, has 0 size for a ray of light. And maybe that answers your question. So the analogy of God as light, well, if the universe has 0 size for light, and if God is light, then the universe has 0 size for God, meaning the entirety of the universe is instantly available to God at all times. Now that sounds fantastic, and that sounds, I mean, I don't understand it. And maybe it's one of those things that I'm not supposed to understand. But it's, I mean, for me, it's just fun to try because, you know, relativity tells me one thing, and then I think about, well, what does that mean? And then I think about, oh, God is light. Well, so if that's reality for God, and if God is light, then that must be the reality for God, unless God is not like light. And then all bets are off. You know, so there has to be a reason why, you know, somebody wrote God is light. And so you tell me that, and so I'll start to dig into that to see what that means to me. And so that's so today was a little bit of me sharing what phrases like that mean to me.
And now I'll be working on what they mean to me, and I thank you for that.
Just don't let your mind be blown up or anything. Well, I thank you all. I hope you learned a little bit, and I hope I wasn't too boring.
Not at all. Thank you, Carlos.
It was really wonderful. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts and your vulnerability. Just kind of putting it all out there. And it's really fascinating. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And to all of you, next week we resume our regular Bible study, which we will continue on the book of Genesis. And also, you will note that on Sunday mornings, we're going to be, our first lessons have been taken from Genesis lately, and will continue to for the next couple of weeks. So those of you who've been kind of listening in on our Wednesday evening Bible study, it'll be interesting to hear your reflections on how this all gets put into the homiletics of our Sunday service. Okay. Very good.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Blessing to
Good
see
night.
you all. Thank you again, Carlos. Good night, everybody. And bon appetit if you haven't had dinner yet.